The Queen of Two Worlds, a bedtime story of Persephone and Demeter. Before we start tonight's tale, take the time to like this video and subscribe to my channel who never missed one of my new stories. Settle yourself comfortably. Let your breathing slow. Allow the tensions of the day to drift away like leaves on a gentle stream. Close your eyes if you wish, and let yourself be carried back through the mists of time, to an age when gods walked the earth and the very seasons themselves were born from love and loss. Chapter 1. The Meadow of Innocence. In the time before time had a proper name, when the world was young and the gods still shaped the very nature of existence, there lived a goddess whose hair shone gold as ripened wheat under summer sun. Her name was Demeter, and she was the keeper of all growing things, the force that pushed green shoots through dark soil, that swelled grain in its husks, that painted fruit with ripeness on the vine. Demeter had a daughter, born of her union with Zeus, the Thunderbringer, the far-seeing king of Olympus. This daughter was called by two names, Persephone, which means she who brings destruction, though none yet knew why she bore such an ominous title, and Kore, which simply means the maiden. She was called Kore most often, for she embodied the very essence of youth, all possibility, all potential, hovering at that luminous threshold between childhood and womanhood. Imagine her now, Persephone of the delicate ankles, the trim-ankled maiden, moving through a meadow of impossible beauty. This was no ordinary field, but a sacred space where the daughters of Oceanus gathered, where the very earth seemed to hum with divine life. The meadow lay soft beneath her feet, carpeted with grasses so lush they seemed to whisper secrets as she passed. The air was heavy with perfume, not the simple scent of flowers, but something richer, more complex, as if the fragrances themselves were alive and aware. Persephone moved among the blossoms like a dancer in a dream, her companions surrounding her in a circle of laughter and song. These were the ocean daughters, beings of ancient waters, their girdles slung low in the fashion of immortals, their voices like streams over stones. Together they gathered the flowers that grew in wild abundance. There were roses, their petals soft as silk, ranging from white as morning mist to red as heart's blood. There were crocuses, purple and gold, pushing up through the grass with their delicate goblet-shaped blooms. Violets clustered in the shade, their modest faces belying their intoxicating perfume. Iris flowers stood tall on their stems, named for the rainbow goddess herself, their petals showing every shade from palest lavender to deepest indigo. And there were hyacinths, heavy-headed and sweet, their scent so rich it seemed to pulse in the air like music. The sun hung lazy and warm overhead, not our distant, burning sun, but Eleus himself in his golden chariot, the watchman who sees all things that transpire beneath his light. He moved across the vault of heaven, his immortal horses breathing flame, his eyes catching every movement, every secret, every truth that unfolded in the world below. The maiden's arms were already full of blossoms, a riot of color against her white robes, when something caught her eye. It was a flower unlike any she had ever seen. Chapter 2. The Narcissus. The flower stood alone, some distance from her companions. At first, it seemed to be a narcissus, one of those elegant blooms with their distinctive shape, white petals radiating around a golden center like a small sun. But as Persephone drew closer, she realized this was no ordinary narcissus. It was a thing of wonder that made her breath catch in her throat. The bloom had not one head but 100, each perfect, each exquisite, all growing from a single root system that seemed to pulse with life. The flower gave off a fragrance so sweet, so intoxicating, that it filled the entire universe, or so it seemed to the maiden as she approached. The scent wrapped around her like silk, like honey, like a spell. It called to her with a voice older than words, promising something she could not name but suddenly, desperately wanted. She had to have it. The desire was overwhelming, consuming, undeniable. What Persephone did not know, could not know, was that this flower had been placed here by design. Gaia herself, the ancient earth, had grown it at the command of Zeus, as a favor to one who waited in darkness below. It was a lure, a trap, as beautiful as it was deadly. The maiden reached out with both hands, her fingers stretching toward those impossible blooms. The moment she touched the stem, the world broke open. Chapter 3. The Earth Splits. The sound was like nothing that had ever been heard before, a deep, groaning crack that seemed to come from the very bones of the world. The soft meadow split apart, torn like cloth, and darkness rushed up from below. Out of that darkness came a chariot of gold, drawn by horses that were not quite horses, immortal steeds whose eyes burned with the cold fire of the underworld, whose hooves struck the air itself as if it were solid ground. And driving those horses was a figure cloaked in shadow and majesty, Hades, the many-named one, the host of many, the one who receives all. He was Zeus's brother, ancient and powerful, ruler of the vast kingdom beneath the earth where all souls eventually traveled. His realm was not evil, but it was absolute. The dead came to him as surely as the harvest came to autumn, and once within his domain, none could leave. His wealth was infinite, for all the gold and gems and precious metals of the earth belonged to him. But his palace was empty of warmth, empty of laughter, empty of life. He had asked Zeus for a bride, and Zeus, in the way of kings who play with the fates of others, had said yes. Not just any bride, but his own daughter, born of his union with Demeter. Zeus had given permission for this taking, though he had not asked the mother. He had not asked the maiden. Hades drove his chariot up through the rent in the earth with terrible purpose. Before Persephone could cry out, before she could run, before she could do more than register the shock of what was happening, he seized her. His grip was iron, inexorable, the grip of death itself. He pulled her into the chariot beside him. Persephone found her voice, and she screamed. It was a sound that pierced the sky, that traveled across mountains and valleys, that echoed off the face of the moon. It was the cry of every child torn from safety, every innocence shattered, every joy transformed to terror in a single instant. Her companions scattered like birds before a storm, their own screams joining hers, but they were powerless to help. The daughters of Oceanus could do nothing against the Lord of the Dead. Hades turned his horses, and they plunged back down through the gap in the earth. The last thing Persephone saw was the sunlight, warm and golden, receding above her like a dream dissolving at dawn. Then the earth closed over her head with a sound like thunder, and she was gone, swallowed into darkness, carried down, down, down to the realm that no living thing should see. Only 3 beings witnessed the abduction in full: Eleus, the sun, who sees all things during his daily journey. Hecate, the goddess of crossroads and magic, who heard the cry from her cave and came forth with a flaming torch. And Zeus himself, who sat apart on Olympus, saying nothing, doing nothing, watching the fate he had set in motion unfold exactly as he had planned. The meadow lay empty now, flowers scattered where they had fallen from Persephone's hands. The narcissus with its 100 heads swayed gently in the breeze, its purpose served. And one goddess did not yet know that her whole world had ended. Chapter 4: Demeter's Search. Demeter heard the scream. She was elsewhere, attending to the 1,000 tasks that fill a goddess's days, when that terrible cry reached her ears, her daughter's voice, raw with fear, calling out in desperate need. The sound struck Demeter like a physical blow. She knew, with the absolute certainty that only a mother can know, that something unspeakable had happened. She came to the meadow like a bird in flight, swift and desperate, her golden hair streaming behind her, her hands already reaching out even though there was nothing to hold. She searched the soft grass, the scattered flowers, the faces of the ocean daughters who stood weeping and confused. But Persephone was gone. Where is she? Demeter's voice was thunder without sound. Where is my daughter? The ocean daughters could tell her nothing useful. They had seen only darkness and horses and shadow. They did not know the name of the one who had taken the maiden. They could only weep and wring their hands and speak of the earth opening. And so Demeter began to search. For 9 days she ranged across the earth like grief given form. She searched mountains and valleys, forests and plains, seashores and rivers. She went to every place a young girl might have wandered, every hidden corner where someone might hide. She carried torches that blazed in her hands, twin flames that turned night into day, and she let them burn unceasingly, for she herself did not rest. She did not eat. Not a morsel of ambrosia, not a sip of nectar, the food and drink of the gods that sustained their immortal bodies. She did not bathe. She did not sleep. She did not tend to the great cycle of growth that was her sacred duty. The world continued around her, but Demeter was lost in her grief, consumed by her search, and the earth began to feel her absence. On the 10th day, when the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, a figure appeared before her. It was Hecate, the mysterious one, she who walks in darkness and knows the secrets that others miss. Hecate came holding a torch that burned with spectral flame, and her face was grave with knowledge. "Queenly Demeter," she said, her voice soft but clear, "bringer of seasons and giver of good gifts, I heard your daughter's cry. I heard it pierce the air like a blade, full of fear and desperation. But I did not see who took her. Come, let us go together to Eleus, the all-seeing sun. He watches over gods and mortals alike. If anyone knows what happened, it is he." Together, the two goddesses traveled to the place where Eleus was preparing to begin his daily journey across the sky. His golden chariot waited, his immortal horses stamping their feet with impatience, eager to run their course across the heavens. Demeter and Hecate stood before him, and the bright goddess spoke. "Eleus, you who see all things beneath your light, if ever I have pleased you with word or deed, if ever I have honored you, then answer me now, what has become of my daughter? I heard her scream, but I saw nothing. Tell me truly, What do you know?" Eleus looked down at her, and there was pity in his ancient eyes. He had seen many sorrows in his long watching, but the grief of a mother for a lost child was among the most bitter. "Demeter," he said, his voice warm as sunlight but heavy with truth, "I will tell you what I know, though the telling brings no comfort. Your daughter has been taken to the Underworld. Hades, the many-named one, he who receives all who die, has seized her and carried her down to his dark kingdom. And this was done with the permission of Zeus, your brother, her father, the loud thunderer who sees far and wide. He gave her to Hades as a bride." The words struck Demeter like hammer blows. Zeus! Her brother had done this. The father of her child had given that child away as if she were a possession, a thing to be traded between men or gods, without consultation, without consent, without love. And Hades, the stern lord of the dead, had her daughter in his cold realm, far beneath the earth, where no sun shone, where no flowers grew, where everything was shadow and silence and the endless waiting of souls. Then Eleus spoke again, and perhaps he meant it as comfort, though it was cold comfort indeed. "Do not grieve too much, bright goddess. Hades is not unworthy. He is brother to Zeus, a king in his own right, powerful beyond measure. Many would consider such a match an honor. Your daughter is now queen of a vast realm." But Demeter heard only that her daughter was lost, trapped, taken by force to a place from which none returned. Chapter 5. The Goddess's Rage. Grief is a strange country. It changes the landscape of the soul, turns familiar roads into mazes, transforms day into perpetual night. But rage is something else entirely. Rage is fire that consumes everything in its path. And in that moment, standing before Eleus with a terrible truth burning in her heart, Demeter felt grief transform into rage so profound that it shook the very pillars of Olympus. She had been patient. She had been faithful. She had tended the earth and made it fruitful, had ensured that mortals had grain for their bread and fruit for their sustenance. She had done everything the gods asked of her and more. And this was how they repaid her: by stealing her daughter, by shattering her world, by treating her child as property to be given away. Zeus could make thunder. She would show him a storm of a different kind. Demeter turned away from Eleus without another word. She turned away from Hecate. She turned away from Olympus, that bright mountain where the gods dwelt in their careless splendor. She would not go back. Not now. Not ever, until her daughter was returned to her. She disguised herself as a mortal woman, an old woman bent with years and sorrow, and she began to walk among the cities of humanity. Eventually, her wanderings brought her to Eleusis, a small town near Athens, unremarkable in most ways but destined to become sacred because of what happened next. In Eleusis, she came to a well called the Parthenian, the Maiden's Well, a name that must have struck her heart like a blade. She sat down beside it to rest, though rest was impossible, and there she waited, an old woman in ragged clothes, her immortal nature hidden beneath the guise of human suffering. She did not wait long. 4 young women came to the well to draw water, daughters of King Celeus, who ruled in Eleusis. Their names were Calidus, Clycidas, Demo, and Calitho, and they moved with the grace and confidence of princesses, though their manner was kind. They saw the old woman sitting alone and were moved by compassion. "Mother," said Calidus, the eldest, "why do you sit here alone? Will you not come with us to our father's house? You look as though you have traveled far and suffered much. Come, let us care for you." Demeter looked up at them with eyes that held 10 days of tears unshed, and she told them a story, a lie that was also a truth, the way the best lies always are. "I am called Doso," she said, her voice cracked with age and sorrow. "I come from Crete, that far island, and I have had misfortune upon misfortune. Pirates seized me, terrible men who cared nothing for my pleas. They brought me across the sea in their swift ship, meaning to sell me as a slave. But when we landed, I escaped while they were eating their dinner. I fled across the dark countryside until I came to this place.
I do not know where I am or who rules here.
But I can work, I can care for children, or keep a house, or do whatever tasks you set me. I ask only for shelter and food, for I am old and have nowhere else to go." The daughters were moved by her tale, and they promised to speak to their mother, Queen Metanera. Soon Demeter found herself walking to the palace of King Celeus, following behind the princesses with her head bowed and her heart raging silently within her breast. Chapter 6. The House of Celeus. The palace at Eleusis was not grand by the standards of the gods, but it was comfortable and well appointed by mortal standards. Queen Metanera received the old woman kindly, for she was a generous soul, and she had a task that needed doing. "Good mother," said the queen, "I have a son, late born and precious to me. His name is Demophon, and he is the delight of my heart. If you will nurse him and care for him, I will reward you well, and you shall have a place in my household for as long as you wish." Demeter looked at the infant in Metanera's arms, a small, red-faced thing that knew nothing of gods or grief, whose whole world was warmth and milk and the sound of his mother's heartbeat. Something in her softened. She reached out and took the child, and when she held him, she felt for the first time in 10 days something other than anguish. "I will care for him," she said quietly, "and no harm shall come to him while he is in my keeping." And so Demeter became the nurse of Demophon, and for a little while her sorrow found a shape it could hold. She could not save her own daughter, but perhaps she could do something for this child, this innocent boy who had the misfortune of being born mortal. She tended him with a care that went beyond mere nursing. She anointed him with ambrosia, the divine fragrance that sustained the gods. She breathed on him with her immortal breath. And at night, when the household slept, she did something more. She laid him in the fire, not to harm him, never that, but to burn away his mortality, to transform his fragile mortal flesh into something divine and deathless. Each night, she would place the sleeping infant in the heart of the fire, and the flames would caress him like a mother's hands, burning away bit by bit the dross of humanity, purifying him, making him more than human. Under her care, the baby thrived as no mortal child had ever thrived. He grew like a god, without needing the milk of his mother's breast, without crying in the night. He became beautiful and strong, and Metanera marveled at the change in him but did not understand its cause. Until the night she spied on the old woman. Metanera could not resist her curiosity. There was something uncanny about this nurse, something that made the queen uneasy even as she was grateful for the woman's care. So one night, she crept from her bed and went silently to the room where Demophon slept. What she saw made her scream. There was her precious son, her late-born child, lying in the heart of the fire like a log of wood. The flames wrapped around him, and for one terrible moment, Metanera was certain her baby was being burned alive. Her scream shattered the spell. Demeter snatched the child from the fire and whirled to face the queen, and in that moment, the disguise fell away like a cloak. The old woman was gone, and in her place stood Demeter in her true form, tall and terrible, golden-haired and glorious, radiating power that made the very air crackle. "Foolish woman!" Demeter's voice was thunder and ice. "You have undone everything. I would have made your son immortal, deathless as the gods themselves, free from age and death and all the sorrows of mortality. But you have ruined it with your ignorant interference. Now he will be merely mortal, subject to death like all your kind. You mortals are fools, unable to recognize good fortune when it is given to you. She set the unharmed child, though now merely mortal again, in his mother's trembling arms, and her voice grew colder still. Know that I am Demeter, she of the golden double axe, she who brings the harvest, she who feeds all living things.
And I am in mourning, for my daughter has been stolen from me.
You will build me a temple here in Eleusis, a great shrine where I can sit in my sorrow.
Build it by the Callichorus well, on the hill above the town.
Build it swiftly and well, and when it is done, I will teach you rites by which you may honor me. But know this, until my daughter is returned to me, the earth will know no blessing from me. Then she grew in size until she filled the room, and the radiance of her divinity blazed like the sun at noon, and all the household fell to their knees in terror and awe.
Chapter 7. The Barren Earth.
The people of Eleusis built the temple as she commanded. They worked night and day, sparing no effort or expense, for they had seen the goddess in her power and did not dare to disappoint her. They raised walls of stone and timber, they set a roof of sturdy beams, they created a space that was beautiful and solemn and worthy of divine presence. When it was finished, Demeter went inside and sat down.
And she stayed there.
Day after day, week after week, month after month, she sat in her temple at Eleusis, wrapped in her grief like a cloak, and the world began to die. She was the goddess of the harvest, the keeper of all growing things, and now she withdrew her blessing.
Nothing grew.
Nothing flourished.
Nothing bore fruit.
The year should have turned toward planting time, when farmers across the known world would plough their fields and scatter seeds and pray for the blessing of good growth. But when the seeds were scattered, they simply lay in the ground, inert, refusing to sprout. The earth held them like a miser holds gold, refusing to give them up to air and sun. The oxen pulled the ploughs, but no green shoots followed in their wake.
The furrows lay empty and barren.
The fields that should have been carpeting themselves in tender green remained brown and dead.
Spring did not come.
Flowers that should have bloomed stayed sleeping. Trees that should have budded remained bare.
The grass did not grow.
The orchards did not blossom. It was as if winter had forgotten how to end, as if the earth itself had decided to die. And then the hunger began. At first it was merely uncomfortable, stomachs that grumbled, belts that needed tightening. But as the months wore on, as the stored grain from the previous harvest dwindled and no new harvest came, discomfort became suffering.
Suffering became anguish.
Anguish became death.
People began to starve.
The very young and the very old went first, as they always do, their bodies too frail to endure prolonged deprivation. Then the sick, the weak, those who had less to begin with. Entire families huddled in their homes, growing thinner and weaker, watching their children waste away, powerless to help them.
The animals suffered too. Cattle grew gaunt and died. Sheep stood with their ribs showing through their fleece. Horses could barely pull their loads.
Even the wild things, the deer and rabbits and birds, began to vanish as the plants they needed for food disappeared. The world was dying, and Demeter did not care. Or rather, she cared about only one thing. Her daughter, lost in darkness, trapped in the realm of death while her mother sat in a temple in Eleusis and let the world burn. And there was another consequence of the earth's barrenness. one that finally reached even the heights of Olympus. The humans had stopped making sacrifices. When you are starving, you do not burn grain in honor of the gods. When your children are dying and you have no food to give them, you do not offer up your last animals on holy altars. The temples stood empty. The smoke of sacrifice no longer rose to heaven. The gods, who depended on these offerings for honor and recognition, found their gifts dwindling to nothing. Zeus, sitting on his throne in Olympus, began to realize that his casual cruelty had set in motion something dangerous. The humans were dying, and if they all died, who would honor the gods? Who would remember them? What was a god without worship? He sent Iris, the rainbow goddess, his swift messenger, to speak with Demeter. Iris came to Eleusis with her shimmering wings and her voice like music, and she spoke honey-sweet words of reconciliation. Demeter did not even look at her. "Go back to Zeus," she said flatly, "and tell him this: I will not return to Olympus. I will not bless the earth. I will not allow anything to grow, not so much as a single blade of grass, until I see my daughter with my own eyes. Let him keep his throne and his power. Let him do whatever he pleases. But I will not relent." Iris returned to Olympus with the message, and Zeus's face darkened like a storm about to break. Chapter 8. The Gods Go Forth. One by one, Zeus sent the gods to speak with Demeter. He sent them with fair words and generous offers. He promised her gifts beyond measure. He offered her any honors she wished, any privileges among the immortals, any place of pride on Olympus. Demeter refused them all. She refused gentle Hestia, keeper of the hearth, who spoke of the warmth of home and family. She refused wise Athena, who offered logical arguments and clever solutions. She refused beautiful Aphrodite, who spoke of love and reconciliation. She refused strong Mars, who at least had the decency not to pretend that war and strategy would solve this problem. She refused Apollo with his music and Artemis with her wild grace and Hephaestus with his gifts of craft and every other god who came to her temple bearing Zeus's commands wrapped in persuasion. To each of them, she gave the same answer: "Bring me my daughter, or let the world die. I no longer care which." The gods returned to Olympus defeated, and Zeus finally understood that he had made a terrible miscalculation. Demeter would not be moved by threats or bribes or rational argument. Her grief had transformed into a will of iron, and she would rather watch the world end than surrender it. So Zeus did the only thing left to him. He sent for Hermes, the messenger, the guide of souls, the one who could travel between worlds. "Go down to the Underworld," Zeus commanded. "Speak with my brother Hades. Use your silver tongue, your gift for persuasion. Tell him that he must release Persephone. Tell him the world is dying. Tell him that even I cannot stand against a mother's grief. Bring the girl up to the light so that Demeter may see her and be persuaded to relent." Hermes took up his staff, the golden one that marked him as Zeus's messenger, and he went down into the earth, down through the winding passages that led to the realm of Hades, down to the place where the dead went and did not return. Chapter 9. The Kingdom of Shadows. The Underworld was not a place of fire and torment. That was a later invention, a different mythology. No, the kingdom of Hades was something stranger and perhaps more terrible. It was a place of profound absence. Absence of warmth, absence of color, absence of growth and change and all the things that marked the living world. It was a realm of shadows and silence, where the souls of the dead wandered like mist through eternal twilight. There was no suffering there, but there was also no joy. No pain, but no pleasure. No sorrow, but no comfort. It was simply the place where existence continued after life had ended, where the shades of those who had been went on in their pale, diminished way forever. In the heart of this realm stood the palace of Hades, a building of black stone that seemed to absorb what little light filtered down from the world above. It was a place of austere magnificence, all hard lines and unadorned surfaces, beautiful in its way but cold, so cold. And in that palace, sitting on a throne beside the Dark King himself, was Persephone. Hermes found them there, Hades in his stern majesty, and the maiden who was now queen of all this vast emptiness. He saw immediately that something had changed. The terrified girl who had been dragged down through the earth was gone. In her place sat a young woman who held herself with a strange, precarious dignity. She wore the robes of a queen now, dark fabrics that rustled when she moved. A crown sat on her dark hair, not the golden circlet of the Olympians, but something heavier, something that spoke of responsibilities she had not chosen but could not refuse. Her face was pale, as if the sun had been leached from her skin during her time in this sunless place. But her eyes were older than they should have been. How long had she been here? Time moved differently in the underworld. For Demeter, it had been nearly a year of suffering and searching and sitting in grief. For Persephone, it might have been decades, or days, or some strange distortion of both. There was no measuring time in a place where nothing changed, where the dead did not age and the seasons did not turn. Hades looked up as Hermes approached, his face unreadable. He was not a cruel god, as some later stories would paint him. He was simply absolute. What came to him, stayed with him. The dead did not leave his kingdom. It was the natural law, the order of things. And he had wanted a queen, a companion in his lonely realm, and Zeus had given him permission to take one. Hermes spoke with the silver tongue for which he was famous. He told Hades of the dying world, of the famine and suffering, of Demeter's implacable grief. He conveyed Zeus's command, not a request, but a command from the king of gods, that Persephone must be released. The world cannot survive without Demeter's blessing, Hermes said carefully. And Demeter will not relent while her daughter remains here. Zeus bids you to release the maiden, that she might return to her mother and the earth might live again. Hades listened to all of this in silence. When Hermes finished speaking, the Lord of the Dead sat for a long moment, his face thoughtful, his dark eyes distant. Then he turned to Persephone, and when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. It seems, my queen, that you are called back to the world above. Your mother grieves for you, and the earth is dying from her sorrow. I cannot stand against the command of Zeus. I will not try. You are free to go, to return to the light and the living, to be reunited with golden-haired Demeter. Persephone's face transformed. For just an instant, she was the maiden again, young, joyful, full of wild hope. The careful queenly mask cracked, and beneath it was simply a daughter who missed her mother desperately. Truly,
she whispered.
I can go home. Truly, Hades said, and he smiled, a rare expression that softened his stern features. I would not keep you here against the will of all Olympus.
Come, I will have my horses readied.
Hermes will guide you back up through the passages to the world above. But as Persephone rose from her throne, as she moved to follow Hermes, Hades called her back.
Wait, he said softly. Before you go, my queen, will you not eat something?
You have had a long journey ahead of you, and you have eaten so little during your time here. Take this, with my blessing.
He held out a pomegranate.
Chapter 10. The Fatal Fruit. The pomegranate was impossibly red, its skin gleaming like polished leather, its weight heavy in his hand. When Hades broke it open, the seeds inside glistened like rubies, each one perfect, each one wet with sweet juice that looked like blood in the dim light of the underworld. Just a few seeds, Hades said, his voice as smooth as dark water, to strengthen you for the journey. In later tellings, scholars and poets would argue about this moment. Some said Hades tricked her, that naive Persephone did not know the law of the underworld. Anyone who ate the food of the dead must remain among the dead. Others said she knew perfectly well what she was doing, that she made a choice with her eyes open, that this was her own will asserting itself in a story where so many choices had been made for her. The truth, like most truths, probably lay somewhere in between.
Persephone looked at the pomegranate seeds.
She was hungry. She had been hungry for so long, had eaten so little in this place of shadows. And she was about to leave, about to return to her mother, about to escape this realm of death. What harm could a few seeds do now, when freedom was so close?
Or perhaps she understood exactly what those seeds meant.
Perhaps, in her time as queen of the underworld, she had learned its laws and its secrets. Perhaps she looked at those ruby-red seeds and saw a future she had not anticipated but could accept. Perhaps she thought of Hades, not the fearsome abductor, but the lonely king who had spoken to her with unexpected gentleness, who had honored her as a queen even when she had no power, who ruled over the dead with stern justice but not cruelty. Perhaps she was tired of being Kore, the maiden, the innocent child whose every step was watched and guarded. Perhaps she had discovered, in the darkness, a kind of power she had never known in the light. Or perhaps she was simply hungry, and the seeds looked sweet, and she did not think beyond the next moment. Whatever her reasons, Persephone took the pomegranate.
She tilted back her head.
She let the seeds fall into her mouth. Some accounts say 3, others say 6, but the exact number does not matter, and she swallowed them. The taste exploded on her tongue, sweet, tart, complex, with an undertone of something else, something that tasted like darkness and finality and the weight of irrevocable choices. Hades watched her swallow, and something flickered across his face, satisfaction, perhaps, or sadness, or both at once. Then he clapped his hands, and the servants came running to ready the golden chariot that would carry Persephone back to the world of light.
Chapter 11. The Return. The journey upward was like being born in reverse.
The chariot climbed through the winding passages that led from the underworld to the surface, and with every turn, every rising passage, the darkness became less absolute.
Shadows gave way to gray light warmed to something almost golden.
And then, Suddenly, gloriously, they broke through into sunlight.
Persephone gasped.
She had forgotten how bright the world was, how warm, how filled with color.
The sky was so blue it hurt to look at.
The grass was so green it seemed to vibrate with life. Every leaf, every flower, every blade of grass seemed to pulse with vitality that was almost overwhelming after the still, unchanging realm below. Hermes guided the chariot to Eleusis, to the temple where Demeter sat in her vigil of grief. Word of their coming ran ahead of them, messengers shouting, people running through the streets, spreading the news that the maiden was returning, that she had been seen, that she was coming home. Inside the temple, Demeter heard the commotion. She rose from where she had sat for so many months, her heart suddenly pounding, hardly daring to hope. She moved to the doorway, and there, coming up the road toward her temple, she saw the chariot.
And in that chariot was her daughter.
Demeter did not walk. She ran. She ran like a woman half her age, like a mortal woman, like any mother who had thought her child lost and now saw her returned. Her golden hair streamed behind her, her robes tangled around her legs, and she did not care about anything except the young woman climbing down from the chariot, the face she had thought never to see again.
Persephone!
Mother! They collided like storms meeting, wrapped their arms around each other, held on as if they would never let go. Demeter buried her face in her daughter's dark hair and wept, great, racking sobs that shook her whole body, all the grief and rage and terror of the past months pouring out in a flood of tears. Persephone clung to her mother and wept too, and their tears mingled together and fell to the barren earth. They stood like that for a long time, neither wanting to be the first to pull away, neither willing to risk losing the other again. Around them, the people of Eleusis watched in awed silence, witnesses to a reunion that was more than personal. It was cosmic, mythic, the healing of a wound that had nearly destroyed the world. Finally, Demeter pulled back just far enough to look at her daughter properly, to reassure herself that this was real, that Persephone was truly here and whole and alive. She cupped her daughter's face in her hands and searched for those familiar features, older than she remembered, bearing marks of experience that had not been there before, but still her child, still her beloved daughter. "Tell me everything," Demeter said, her voice rough with emotion.
Tell me what happened. Did he harm you? Were you treated well?
Oh, my darling, I have been half mad with worry. And so, there in front of the temple, with the afternoon sun warming their shoulders and the people of Eleusis gathered around in a respectful circle, Persephone told her story. She spoke of the abduction, of the terror of being dragged down into darkness. She spoke of arriving in the Underworld, of the cold palace and the stern king who had claimed her as his bride. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with the precision of someone who has learned that words matter, that they can reveal truths you didn't mean to share or hide truths that need to be spoken. Hades had not harmed her, she said. He had treated her with respect, had honored her as a queen even when she felt anything but queenly. He had been cold, yes, but not cruel.
Distant, but not unkind.
The underworld was a terrible place for the living, but it was simply what it was, the realm of the dead, neutral and absolute, without malice but also without warmth. She had been lonely, so lonely. She had missed the sun, missed flowers, missed laughter and growth and all the things that made life worth living. She had thought she would die there, not of any harm done to her body, but of the sheer hopelessness of existence in that unchanging place.
And then Demeter asked the question that would change everything.
Did you eat anything while you were there? Any food? Any drink? Tell me truly, child, did you consume anything from the underworld?
Persephone hesitated.
In that hesitation, Demeter saw the truth, and her face went pale. The pomegranate seeds, Persephone whispered. Just before I left, Hades gave me a pomegranate. I ate some of the seeds. I didn't think. How many?
Demeter's voice was sharp as broken glass.
How many seeds did you eat? I don't know.
A few.
Maybe 6?
Mother, what does it matter?
I'm here now. I'm home. But Demeter had turned away, her hands pressed to her face, a sound of anguish escaping her lips.
Because she knew.
She knew the law that even gods could not break. Anyone who ate the food of the underworld must return to the underworld. By eating those pomegranate seeds, Persephone had bound herself to Hades' realm. She could visit the world above, but she could not stay there.
She would have to go back.
No, Demeter said, and the word was a prayer and a curse and a declaration of war all at once.
No, I will not accept this.
I will not lose her again.
Chapter 12. The Compromise.
The conflict that followed nearly shook Olympus to its foundations. Demeter raged at Zeus, at Hades, at the inexorable laws that governed even the gods. She threatened to make the previous famine look like a mild inconvenience. She swore she would burn the world down before she would surrender her daughter a second time. Zeus, caught between his brother's rights and his sister's wrath, sought frantically for a solution. He called councils, consulted ancient laws, argued with Hades through endless divine negotiations. The lord of the underworld was technically in the right. Persephone had eaten the food of the dead, however unwittingly, and the law was clear.
But Zeus was also pragmatic.
The world could not survive another season of Demeter's grief. Humanity was on the brink of extinction. Something had to give. Finally, after much debate and divine maneuvering, they reached a compromise, the kind of solution that satisfies no one completely but prevents total catastrophe.
Persephone would be divided.
For part of each year, she would live in the underworld with Hades, fulfilling her obligation as Queen of the Dead, honoring the law that bound her to that realm through the eating of the pomegranate seeds. For the rest of the year, she would return to the surface, to live with her mother, to walk in sunlight, to be the daughter that Demeter loved. The ancient sources don't agree on the exact division. Some say Persephone spends 4 months below and 8 months above. Others claim it's 6 months in each realm. The precise accounting matters less than the essential truth. She would be shared between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither, forever divided between the light and the dark. When the decision was announced, Demeter wept, but they were different tears now. Not the tears of absolute loss, but the tears of partial victory, of compromise, of learning to live with an outcome that is not what you wanted but is better than the alternative. Persephone, for her part, accepted the arrangement with a grace that surprised everyone. Perhaps her time in the underworld had taught her something about acceptance, about finding strength in situations you cannot change. Or perhaps she had discovered that she was more than just Kore, the maiden. She was also Persephone, the bringer of destruction, queen of the dead, a goddess in her own right with her own domain and her own power. She would be two things at once, forever, the daughter of spring and the queen of death, the maiden who gathered flowers and the sovereign who judged souls, the girl who belonged to her mother and the woman who belonged to herself, and perhaps, in her own way, to the dark king who had stolen her but also honored her. Chapter 13. The First Spring. When the matter was finally settled, when all the agreements had been made and all the divine contracts had been sealed, Demeter kept her promise. She rose from her temple at Eleusis, and she blessed the earth. It was not a gentle blessing, not a slow awakening. It was an explosion of life, of growth, of fecundity so intense it bordered on violence. The dead fields erupted with green shoots. Flowers burst from the ground in impossible profusion, not just growing, but surging upward as if they had been held back by force and were now freed to do what they were always meant to do. Trees budded and bloomed in a single day. Vines spread across hillsides overnight. Grass carpeted the bare earth so quickly you could almost watch it grow. Seeds that had lain dormant in the ground for nearly a year suddenly remembered their purpose and split open, sending roots down and shoots up with desperate urgency. The earth, which had been dead, was alive again. The earth, which had been brown and bare, was green and gold and every color of flower that ever existed. The world had returned from the brink of death, and it celebrated with wild, exuberant abundance. Farmers stood in their fields and wept with relief. Mothers who had watched their children grow gaunt with hunger now saw color return to their faces. The animals grew fat again. The birds sang. The bees returned to their work, and the butterflies danced in clouds of color through the revived meadows. This was the first spring, not the first chronologically, but the first that mattered, the first that was earned through suffering and loss and partial redemption. Before this, seasons had simply turned in their predetermined cycle. But now, spring means something. It was Persephone's return, Demeter's joy, the world's reprieve from death. And when summer ripened the grain and brought the fruit to fullness, that too was Demeter's blessing, her gratitude that she had her daughter with her, walking in sunlight, laughing in the warm air, alive and present and real. Chapter 14. The First Autumn. But the year turns, as years must. The months of summer passed, rich and golden, and eventually the time came for Persephone to keep her part of the bargain. The day of her departure was not sudden. They both saw it coming, like a shadow growing longer as the sun descended toward the horizon. The light began to change, growing warmer, more golden, with that particular quality that speaks of endings and transitions. The angle of the sun dropped lower. The days grew incrementally shorter. Demeter felt it in her bones, the approaching separation, the coming sorrow. She tried to hold each moment, to make each day last longer, to store up memories like grain against a coming famine. She and Persephone walked through the fields together, making the most of their time, speaking of everything and nothing, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes in urgent conversation, as if there were 1,000 things that needed to be said before the parting. And then the day arrived. Hades came for his queen, emerging from the earth in his chariot as he had that first time, though everything was different now. This was not an abduction but a retrieval, not theft but the fulfillment of an agreement. Persephone went to him willingly, though not happily. She kissed her mother's cheek, promised to return when her time below was finished, and climbed into the chariot with the dignity of a queen who knows her duty. Demeter watched her daughter descend back into the earth, watched the gap close over her like a wound healing. And even though she knew Persephone would return, even though this was not permanent, the grief still struck her like a physical blow. She sat down in her temple at Eleusis, and she mourned. And as she mourned, the world began to change. The leaves on the trees turned color, green bleeding away to reveal the golds and reds and oranges that had been hidden underneath all along. They were beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful, but they were also dying. One by one, they let go of their branches and drifted down to carpet the earth in rustling drifts. The flowers withered. Their bright petals faded and fell. The grass turned brown. The air grew cool, then cold. Frost came in the mornings, painting the world in delicate crystals of ice that melted when the sun rose but returned each night a little stronger. This was autumn, season of endings, time of harvest but also of decline. The farmers gathered what they could, storing it against the coming darkness. The animals grew thick coats or prepared to sleep through the cold months. The world prepared for death, not permanent death, but the temporary death that would last until spring returned. And then winter came. Winter was Demeter's grief made manifest. The trees stood bare and skeletal against gray skies. Snow fell and covered the world in white silence. Rivers froze. The earth grew hard as stone. Nothing grew. Nothing bloomed. Nothing lived except in waiting, in dormancy, in the patient endurance of those who know that this too shall pass. But it was bearable now, because Demeter knew it would end. Persephone would return. Spring will come again. This was not the catastrophic famine of that first year, but a natural cycle, a rhythm of death and rebirth that would repeat forever. Chapter 15. The Eternal Return. And so the pattern was set, the cycle established that would continue for as long as the world endured. Each year, when the time came, Persephone descended to the Underworld. She left the bright world behind, said goodbye to her mother, and returned to her throne beside Hades in the realm of shadows. There she ruled as queen, judged the souls of the dead, maintained order in that vast kingdom of silence. She was powerful there, respected, even feared. The dead bowed before her, and she spoke their fates with authority. She was not unhappy in the underworld, exactly. It was her domain. After all, her kingdom. She had learned its ways, mastered its mysteries. Hades treated her as an equal, consulted her on matters of importance, respected her judgment. They were partners in that dark realm, neither quite husband and wife in the way mortals understood it, but something stranger and more complex, two sovereigns sharing a kingdom, two immortals bound by duty and agreement and perhaps, eventually, a kind of understanding that was not love but was not entirely unlike it either. But she missed the sun. She missed flowers. She missed her mother's laugh and the warmth of summer on her skin. The underworld was her kingdom, but it was not her home. And so, when her time below was complete, she returned to the surface world with a joy that never diminished, no matter how many times she made the journey. Each time was like the first time, breaking through into sunlight, gasping at the color and warmth and life of it all, running to embrace her mother as if they had been separated not for months but for decades. Demeter never tired of welcoming her daughter back. Each return was a miracle, a resurrection, proof that even death could be defeated, if only temporarily. She would take Persephone's hands and lead her through the fields that were already beginning to turn green, already starting to bloom, and they would walk together through the returning spring, celebrating the reunion that was also the world's renewal. This is why we have seasons. This is why spring returns each year after winter's death. This is why autumn brings both beauty and sorrow, why winter is cold but bearable, why summer is precious because we know it cannot last. It is all because of a mother's love and a daughter's divided heart. Because of a maiden who picked a flower and a god who stole her. Because of grief that nearly destroyed the world and a compromise that saved it. Because of pomegranate seeds eaten in darkness and sunshine that returns after shadow. Chapter 16 The Mysteries. The people of Eleusis never forgot what had happened in their town. How could they? They had witnessed Demeter in her grief and her glory. They had built the temple where she sat during those terrible months. They had seen the world die and be reborn. And so, at Demeter's instruction, they created the Eleusinian Mysteries, sacred rites that reenacted the story of Persephone's abduction and return, that celebrated the cycle of death and rebirth, that promised initiates a better fate after death because they understood the truth that Persephone embodied. Death is not the end, merely a transition, and life always returns. The rites were secret, so secret that anyone who revealed them faced death. We know they involved a procession from Athens to Eleusis, following the path of Demeter's search. We know there was fasting and purification, symbolic of Demeter's grief and Persephone's ordeal. We know there were sacred objects revealed, powerful symbols whose meaning was known only to the initiated. We know that at the climax of the ritual, something was shown, a vision, a revelation, an epoptea that changed those who witnessed it. Some great truth about life and death, about the eternal cycle, about the mystery at the heart of existence. We know that people traveled from all over the ancient world to be initiated into these mysteries. Emperors and philosophers, slaves and merchants, men and women all came to Eleusis seeking that transformative experience. And those who received initiation spoke of it with hushed reverence for the rest of their lives, though they never revealed what they had seen. The mysteries continued for nearly 2,000 years, until they were finally suppressed in the early Christian era. The last hierophant, the final priest who knew the complete rites, died without passing on the knowledge. The secret was lost. But the story remained. The myth of Persephone and Demeter survived the death of the mysteries themselves, because it spoke to something fundamental in human experience, the bond between mother and daughter, the inevitability of loss, the persistence of hope, the eternal cycle of death and renewal. Epilogue. The Queen of Two Worlds. And Persephone? What of her? In the end, she became something unique among the gods, a being who truly belonged to two worlds, who understood both life and death, light and shadow, growth and decay. She was the maiden in spring, running through meadows with flowers in her hair. She was the queen in winter, sitting in stern judgment on her throne of bones. She learned to hold both identities without letting either one consume her. She learned that you could be multiple things at once, that apparent contradictions could coexist in a single soul. She was daughter and queen, victim and sovereign, the one who was taken and the one who chose. Some versions of her story emphasize her helplessness, painting her as a passive figure in someone else's narrative. But other versions recognize something more complex. A young goddess who was forced into an impossible situation and found a way not just to survive but to claim power in it.
Who took the role thrust upon her and made it her own.
Who became queen of the dead not through choice but through necessity, and then became the best queen the Underworld had ever known. She rules there still, in the old stories, in the deep places of myth and imagination. When your time comes, when you make that final journey down into shadow, it will be Persephone who receives you. Not cruel, but not soft either.
Just, but not unkind.
She understands what it means to die, because she died in her own way when she was torn from the light. She understands what it means to be reborn, because she returns to life every spring. She is waiting there, in the darkness, with her pomegranate crown and her knowing eyes. Queen of the dead, Lady of Spring, Kore who became Persephone, the maiden who became so much more than anyone expected. And every spring, without fail, she returns to her mother. Every spring, the world remembers how to be alive. Every spring is a promise kept, a covenant renewed, a story that ends with reunion and begins again with growth. This is her gift to us, the certainty that after winter comes spring, after darkness comes light, after death comes something. Perhaps not the same life, perhaps not the same form, but something.
A continuation, a transformation, a return.
And so our story ends, as all stories must, though the tale itself continues in an endless cycle. Let these words carry you now into sleep, into dreams, into that small darkness that is not death but rest. Let Persephone's journey comfort you with its truth, that what seems like an ending is often transformation, that what appears lost can be found again, that even in deepest winter, spring is waiting. Sleep now, and remember, the world turns, the seasons change, and what returns is never quite the same as what left, but is precious nonetheless. Good night, and may your dreams be gentle. This bedtime story is based on authentic ancient sources, primarily the Homeric hymn to Demeter, 7th to 6th century BCE, along with accounts from Hesiod, Ovid, Pausanias, and Apollodorus. While the narrative has been expanded and embellished for atmospheric storytelling, all major plot points and themes derive from these classical texts and peer-reviewed scholarship on Greek mythology.